knows, for the month of May, Talenza are promoting Australian SMEs, because if we buy Australian, engage with Australian businesses, that's what's going to drive our economy. And today we've got a very exciting, probably one of the most exciting fintechs that will be for 2020, 2021, which is Verteva. So welcome, Andrew, but I'll hand over to you to give a little bit of introduction and background.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks. And hi, everyone. Look, as we said, my name's Andrew Walker. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Verteva. And look, we're just lucky that we've completed our Series A fundraising. That's what we're here to talk about. My background is in, well, Andrew, it's a long story. It's my background is in everything from cleaning rooms to working on ski fields to being a banker to being a startup person to being a consultant, you name it. So I'm sort of a bit of a jack of all trades.
Class. Well, that's obviously leads in then. So you've obviously had an amazingly successful corporate career, and you could turn your hand and get a pick of multiple of jobs. So why have you pivoted and chosen to go down a startup and fintech route? Because it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, look, it's a lot of people ask that question, and it's at one level it's easy just to say, you know, it's either in your DNA or it's not. People hear you throw those sort of lines around all the time. I don't think that's necessarily true. For me, it was more it was finding the right person at the right time and seeing the right opportunity. And so for me, it was more of an intersection of a whole lot of points that got me to make this decision. And it was, so I was thinking about making the move, and I sat down with a really good friend of mine from business school, and I said, well, look, I'm looking at two opportunities basically after I decided I was going to leave Westpac. And the first of which was to go back to what I was doing about a decade ago. So I was a corporate turnaround guy. I had a business, and I worked in an area called special situations consulting, which is a really fancy way of saying if stuff goes really badly wrong and someone needs to go in and fix it, and it might not be all that pretty on the way through the fixing. That was my business. And so I was obviously in this environment looking at going back and doing that type of restructuring work, because as you're probably aware, there's an almost unlimited demand for that now. This gentleman sat me down. It was really good advice. And he said, so in your career, you've worked in big corporates, you've worked in the middle of the business where things are big and growing and going well, or big and growing and going well. You've worked in the recovery end of the business where things are broken and you either need to break them completely or bounce them and fix them. And you've done a little bit of startup work, but you haven't actually really done a startup properly. So do you think that you want to look back on your career in 15 years and say, oh yeah, I went back to something I've already done, or do you want to try something else? And it was sort of a trite throwaway comment, but it was actually pretty helpful advice, right?
It was like calling you chicken.
That's the short version of it. Exactly right. Yeah.
Tangled you the carrot and you bit it. Brilliant.
Yeah, it was that you are chicken. You should have a go.
Amazing. And then what have you learned so far from flipping to the startup side of things?
Oh, look, it's really in this environment, that's a tough question to ask, isn't it? To answer. Because there's been, our journey to date has been so massively impacted by, you know, a once in a generation change in societal behaviour and interactive dynamics and kind of everything. So it's really hard not to have the conversation be a COVID-19 conversation. So all of it, but covering off all of the obvious things, like on a day-to-day basis, we get, I don't know, a month's worth of work done here relative to my previous job, at least. We actually make this thing called a decision. And for those of you that work in big companies, it's where people get together and they discuss something, and then sometimes disagree on it, but they actually decide something and then go and do something about it. It's quite unusual. And no PowerPoint gets presented or manufactured, and we don't have quotas for who should be in the room to make the decision, and there's no, 15 lines of risk overseeing every decision and looking over your shoulder, and it's quite refreshing.
Yeah, well, we do the same thing as my ownership group. We have every Thursday morning, we have a power hour, 8 till 9 o'clock, talk about some operational stuff, make decisions, move forward. So every week the business has to move forward, because otherwise, you're never going to kind of get out the traps. And then what anything scare you, or what excites you about this opportunity with Verteva?
Look, I think we spent so much time thinking through what the opportunity was that nothing particularly scares me. The only thing that should scare everyone is execution, right? And being really focused on executing at the right time frame with the right capital, and being good stewards of your investors' money. So that doesn't scare me, but I'm mindful of that all of the time. Look, what excites me is we saw the opportunity, my business partner and myself, a long time ago. And in this particular space that we're looking at, which is non-bank mortgage origination, digitally driven mortgage origination, we saw this really interesting pattern emerging where, on the one hand, incumbents had convinced themselves that the core of their franchise was protected because of the regulatory capital barrier. And they were spending a lot of their time looking at the fringes of the franchise. So the payment switch, and Apple Pay started to go around the payment switch. And then, of course, Afterpay came and blew the whole thing up. And so the edges of payments, interchange, currency, all of Revolut took exchange and currency and blew that up across Europe. So around the edges of the banking franchise was where all the heat and all the attention was. But if you don't understand anything about banking, you know that 85% of the economic rent of a bank is made in mortgages. Right? The rest of it is interesting but sort of superfluous. And that we started to then think about, well, if you're going to disrupt somewhere, the largest revenue pool seems like a good place to start. So why haven't people done that to date, or had a good go at it at scale? And the answer was, conveniently, the technology just didn't simply exist. And to allow you to put into a business model that could compete at such a low OPEX run rate, with such a high capital efficiency, that you could in effect make money and do really well by being targeted at the right segment, and actually still manage the spread of the margin from the wholesale money, which you're actually getting from your competitors in many instances, to the retail proposition you're laying out in the marketplace. 4 years ago, that was not true.
Well, the technology, even from, I had done a business plan to set up Talenza probably 7 years ago, and the cost to establish it even then, from even recruitment business to where it was 3 years ago, was like half the price. Like, technology has become more accessible, the cloud, I think the rise of the SME and startups is only the beginning, right?
Yep, that's right. And it's the two dimensions to it. The first of which is, there's probably multiple dimensions, but the first of which is obviously the cloud's changed everything in terms of operating scale and efficiency. The second of which is modern technology stacks are obviously all built on and resting an open API structure, and they're all built in a modular fashion. So actually building a modern technology stack is not really building, frankly, anything. It's basically it's a jigsaw puzzle. So you're configuring best of class microservices together to get you the outcome that you want, and can configure that very quickly and at relatively speaking a very low cost. Now, a lot of those microservices and modules that we need for our business, they didn't exist 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So it just so happens that the idea for us has aligned to the market opportunity, which is aligned to the economics and the market cycle, or the economic cycle. The technology's aligned at the same time. And then the last piece we needed to bring together was the expertise that we bring to the table and understanding the data schema and what data feeds are out there and what we would need to do to radically overhaul the customer experience. And you put all those together, and that's our business.
So what problem then do you think is Verteva solving? So why have you established it?
So look, there's a couple of ways to answer it. There's a technology way to answer it, a process way, or a customer way. We'll just dive in and see which one comes out. The way that mortgages are priced in Australia is the lowest risk customers are cross-subsidising the others. So we don't have individual risk-based pricing. Now that we can have a long theoretical conversation around what that means and when that will be here. I think it's pretty obvious what it means. When it'll be here will be sometime in the future, probably over the next 10 years. But at the moment, if you are a PAYG income earner, you've got a low LVR on your property, you've got a good credit history, and you've had your mortgage for more than a couple of years, you will almost certainly be overpaying. Yeah. And the risk models of the banks, they just don't allow them to accurately price very low risk customers. And so you aren't getting the rate that you probably should for the risk that you bring, and you're helping other people get a lower rate than they should. So we looked at that and said, well, that's interesting because that's quite an attractive segment. And then we looked at it and said, there's another issue here with pricing. Where pricing intersects with distribution, right? Where if you're getting your mortgage through a mortgage broker, we know what mortgage broker economics look like, right? So it's 60 basis points up front and a trailing 20 for the life of the loan or some variant thereof. And you start to add that on to the price of your mortgage. And even if you average that out over the average life, whatever that would be, it's got 5 years of a mortgage, you start to look at it and say, well, when that distribution cost is embedded into the cost that you're paying as a customer, but the service that you received was like some dude filling out a 50-page form, you start to look at that and go, why wouldn't I be able to get 35 basis points off the cost of my loan every year? And the answer is because of the way that it was distributed. And we looked at that and said, well, that seems like a pretty interesting opportunity as well. And then we looked at the overarching service experience that the customer had in getting a mortgage or refinancing a mortgage. And this comes down to the data point, which is it's one of the very few industries in the world where, that hasn't changed in 40 years because it's built on product on old system on old product on old system. It's too expensive to change, but it's one of the few products in the world where you go and ask a customer to, in effect, sit an exam and bring a whole lot of information themselves, which they may or may not have at their fingertips, fill in a 50-page form, then take that information away and go and verify it against the source data, and then come back to the customer and say to the customer, well, look, we've been through the form and we've gone and looked actually at the source data, and look, you were wrong when you said this, so we're just going to fix this. And so you have this odd customer experience where customers then sitting there with someone basically saying you either by implication lied or you were wrong, and I've actually gone and got the source data and I've checked it against you, and now I've come back and this is what we'll do. And then you wait for a few weeks to see what happens. Well, if the source data exists, our view as a company is the source data should drive the process.
100%.
And so we're reversing the way that the information flows because it's a much better customer experience for someone to ID themselves, get interested in the offer that we have. We go and do the heavy lifting for the customer and take them on a journey which says, look, here are the various things you need to do to get a mortgage. But we've taken the liberty of doing 80 to 90 to 100% of those things for you. Now, can you verify that this is you, this information is correct? And so we reverse that.
And that's what, like you said, that's the old tech that the big banks are sat on, which is COBOL, they can't even get the data points they need to even understand their customers, right? So that's the whole beauty of starting off a fresh stack with the amount of data that exists that everyone's willing to give you, because actually no one has the time these days, and everyone's been through it, or the people that have been through it. It's the most painful experience from a mortgage process, right? I mean, I hate admin, so lucky I have a wife that loves it. So, but there's,
you think about now, as we've all been forced to be in timeout and sit at home. Think about, well, I'm quite an impatient person anyway, but you think about all the people who are now looking at global best practice versus everyone else, and they go on to Amazon one click, for example, and they've been sitting at home, so they've gone and bought themselves some perfume or a pot plant or whatever, and their information's captured, it's securely stored. The next time they go there, they're recognised, there's a personalised landing page for them. It recognises their browsing history, it knows what they bought last time, it's stored all their payment information, it's got all their delivery details. And then when you want to buy something, hence the one-click process, you click a button, all of the forms are pre-populated, all the security's done, and the product's on its way. So that's now what people are expecting in terms of experience with everyone that they're interacting with. And then you juxtapose that with financial services today in Australia. It's every time you go there, you go to the page, you start filling in first name, last name, tax roll number, if anyone can remember that. Then amusingly, certainly for the bank that I use, your eight-digit personal identification number.
Yeah.
Which still blows my mind away, because I'm a New Zealander, as you can probably tell. We got assigned personalised login IDs in New Zealand in 1993. Yeah. Yet when I log on to my Westpac site here, I need to remember some random eight-digit number that was assigned to me when I joined as a customer. And I still can't figure out why 30 years on I haven't solved it.
But I always, whenever someone arrives into Australia that's never lived here, whether it's a Brit, a Kiwi, American, whatever, when you're dealing with in the recruitment space, they always like try and, Australia's, a classic, everyone just thinks there's loads of white people around, so it must be similar to where I'm from, yada, yada, yada. But I always try to explain to people, if you look at the retail experience, like the big shopping stores like Myer, David Jones, Harvey Norman, they're so archaic. Like the Aussies love to see it and feel it, but their processes are just horrendous. That buying experience is painfully slow and old-fashioned, and it just hasn't really changed. But I do think this pandemic is going to force them all to. I think their sales have gone up on online e-commerce and like Myer by 160% in the last 2 months. You could have done this 10 years ago.
This is. I don't think that anyone should underestimate how different the world is going to be behaviourally on the back of COVID-19. I'm not talking about random people walking around with masks. I mean, the way that we interact with products, services, and distribution is now fundamentally changing in front of our eyes in a hyper-accelerated cycle, because basically people have got no other choice. The whole world, in effect, has been forced to live their lives through their screen. Yeah. And that's, you think about what that would represent in normal times, let's make a number up, that's 15 to 20 years worth of change that's going to happen in a 12-month period because people haven't got a choice. So it's going to be a phenomenal shift.
It's funny, I've had to go to the chemist a few times for, the little kids need some medicine. And it's funny, at the shopping malls, the only people who were there over the last couple of months, maybe people in their 60s and 70s. And so obviously the other generations that maybe get a bit slow behind the times in buying online are obviously forced to do it, want to do it, and now getting used to it. Because I think a lot of people are just creature of habits. They know they like to walk and buy something in person. And, they know that they fill out the 50 forms for a mortgage and all the rest of it. They just go with it and don't challenge it. Whereas now companies are being forced, individuals are being forced. But I could talk about that all day, to be fair. But in terms of back to Verteva, so what are the goals then for the next, you're obviously at an early startup phase from a build phase, I'm assuming. But so what's the goal next 3, 6, 12 months
Yeah, good question. So we're in configuration and build at the moment, so product build. So we're scaling the team up. Seems to double every time I look, but we're scaling the team up, and we're in product configuration and build. That will take 5 to 6 months in reality. These are reasonably complicated structures that we're pulling together, certainly if you want to get the customer experience right. Then we have a lot of testing, funding to back-end funding to wire into the business, and looking to launch publicly towards the end of this calendar year, or more likely, depending on what the markets look like, early 2021.
Okay, interesting. And then in terms of your competition, then, who do you feel you're sitting closer to, or want to sit closer to? In you've got the 86-400s, the Athena home loans. Like, what's the, if people don't know or obviously haven't experienced Verteva yet, what would they look for the future? What is it going to look like?
Yeah. So the short answer, and then I'll give you the long answer. The short answer is we look a lot more like Athena home loans than we do 86-400. Athena, Nathan and the guys there have done an exceptional job in vanguarding and building a category, right? Improving the mortgage experience and getting people comfortable that, you don't, if you're going to take a loan out, you don't need to take a loan with one of the big four banks. In fact, arguably, it's going to be cheaper and a better experience to go somewhere else. So they've done a great job. Our business is similar to them in many respects. But we don't see them at all as a competitor. By default, we are, in as much as, one customer wants a mortgage, they come to two people, you're competing. But look, in order for us to be successful in our business case, we have to get a very, very small percentage of the $1.8 trillion mortgage market in Australia. And that's true of those guys as well. So if we thought that we're competing against another startup for small amounts of market share rather than taking the share off the big four by offering a better service, then I think we're thinking the wrong way. Yeah. So our business model is we have an ACL, so an Australian credit license, is the regulatory framework, and an AFSL, so a services license, obviously, down the track. But we're not an ADI. So 86-400, Zinja, and the others have gone down the neobank path of development, and the neobank strategy is one of you actually go and get a sandbox relief to get, in effect, a baby banking license. Prove your tech works okay, your risk and control frameworks all hang together. APRA gets comfortable, they grant you a full banking license, so you become an authorised deposit-taking institution. And that's the path that they're taking. So their product is very much what have they got? They've got deposits in large part, and so they've got, in effect, half of the banking equation. And the neobanks then now turning their minds to, well, I've got half of the banking equation, now kind of, what do I do next? I've built up a database of customers, what other products can I add to them? We're not going down that path. We won't be looking to get an ADI. We're not looking to be APRA regulated. It's very, very expensive. A banking license and the regulatory capital associated with it is quite significant, and it's just not a model that we want to go down.
Okay, cool. And then, so what's the tech actually stack for the the nerds out there? What's the tech behind the bad boy?
Yeah, so look, we've got it's a modular stack, ultimately sitting on a Salesforce backbone, and then all the microservices. So Heroku sits in the middle. All the microservices plumb in and out of that middleware layer, but plumbs all onto the workflow backbone of Salesforce.
Okay. And then actually, I forgot to ask, have you got a target date for the first loan? Have you got as part of the plan? I'm sure you're a detailed guy, so I'm sure you've got it written somewhere. Or is there a vision board of saying first loan?
Yeah, it's interesting you should ask that. We actually don't. We don't have a target date. We've got a loose sense of where that's going to be. The reason that we don't have a specific date is we think about it in terms of like modules of activity. So our business plan is similar to our technology stack. So we're in the configuration build, which will then turn into the test and prove. That will then turn into the pre-marketing, market readiness, and then we'll go to market launch. And each of those has got a certain time period associated with it. If we're, for example, 2 weeks longer in the build, then everything just slides by 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. We can do some things contemporaneously, but in order for you to launch a product, you've got to have your marketing campaigns, you've got to have your mail ups done, you've got to have your contact list sorted, you've got to have a whole lot of activity. So that has to be, T minus 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it looks like. We just haven't got to that micro level of planning yet.
Yeah. I know. Some of those things excite me. Just I'd probably be there at the computer screen waiting for it to be processed. It's that first loan and just be recording it. It'll just be, I'm sure it'll be an exciting day when it's done and you can see it.
And 100%, the team will be very excited.
You're cracking a few brewskis for sure on that day. And so from a customer perspective, you mentioned customer experience quite a few times through this then. So what would a customer expect from you guys? What's going to be the backbone of your customer service?
So the way that we think about the refinancing process is probably the first big change. So the way that we're going to be looking to do it using data to drive the decision and to do the lifting on behalf of the customer, you'll be able to refinance your mortgage in less time than your average commute into the city. So we're targeting 15 minutes or less. In fact, we think we might be able to get substantially below that. And so that's the first thing, is there's not a lengthy wait period if people meet the criteria. The second thing is that, as I mentioned before, we're going to do the lifting for the customer. So we're not going to assume that you've got 200 pages of bank statements sitting in front of you, ready to plug into a work form online or write into a 50-page application form. We're going to go and get the source data, categorize it appropriately, and do that work for you. And so you'll be then looking at it saying, does that look right? I understand where it came from. That categorization seems reasonable and I'm okay with that. So think about the way that, if you think about what you would do to apply for a mortgage or refinance your mortgage, you sit down with someone face to face, right? If you've got a mortgage broker for 2 or 3 hours, and then they fill in a 50-page form for you while you then run in and out of your office to your filing cabinet or onto your computer to find out where all that information is, and oftentimes you don't have it. We just get rid of that entire experience and go and get the source data first and populate all of the things you need to have populated. And then there are gaps. We'll ask you for the gaps. We're going to ask you for the bulk of it. So that's, I think, a pretty good improvement of customer experience. And then once you are a customer of ours, we've got some pretty in-depth plans to build our product around the principles of financial wellness. So our product construct will have I don't really want to go too far down this track, but a new spin on what a redraw account looks like. Where we as the product owner and originator will use a whole lot of algorithms in the back to make sure that you are always in the best financial position that you possibly can be in. So, for example, I've always found it amusing personally that on my online banking, every so often I'll get a text sent to me from my bank saying, "Oh, heads up, in 24 hours, you're going to be overdrawn in this check account or that credit card. Please log on and make a payment or you'll get charged a fee."
Yeah.
I've always found that sort of an amusing. I wonder who was the person that concluded that the best way to improve the customer experience of charging unnecessary fees, because there's money in all the other accounts, who decided that the best thing to do was to, and it would have been expensive because it's an old technology stack, write a whole lot of code and send a whole lot of alerts out to then make it the customer's problem, right, to go and do something before you get charged a fee that's unnecessary in the first place. You sort of think, I wonder who came up with that idea, rather than just looking at the bank accounts and saying, you're in a net asset position and you've got plenty of money in all these other accounts. Why don't we, if it's a small amount, why don't we just transfer the $50 that's drawn, even if it's virtually, from this account to this account, and tell me a notification saying, hey, great news, you were going to get overdrawn, but we've taken the liberty of moving $50 from this account to this account. There are no breaking of term deposit fees or whatever. We hope that's okay. Click here. Why are you telling me and then making me do the work? And then if I don't do the work because I'm busy, then fining me? It's a good example of how the system thinking is all the wrong way around.
Well, it's archaic, right? The banks, the bankers used to, they were the boss, right? It's almost fear mongering, a fair bit of historical banking. But if you're thinking about those problems and frustrations, I mean, they're out there, right? If you went and did a case study, I'm sure that would come back from so many of the people. If you're thinking about those things and solving those things, then it's probably a reason why you're going to be probably one of the most exciting fintechs to be around in the market, to be fair, because that would just be like a game changer, and it would definitely put the big four under a lot of scrutiny and pressure. I think to be they're just not, they're talking about customer service, right, but they're not.
Well, I think that's right, and the one of the great things of working in a smaller company in a different environment is you get to argue with each other, and you get to disagree. And frankly, no one really cares. It's just everyone's got a difference of opinion. But there's no need to have kind of forced agreement, which happens a lot in big organizations. So I'll give you an example of that in our context. I'm wrong, by the way, but I have a view that, I'm right for me, but I've accepted with my business partner that, generally speaking, this is probably wrong. So I have a personal view that in 10 years' time, the future of banking will be ambient. And by ambient, I mean it will fall into the background of your life, and an intelligent agent will manage your financial affairs on your behalf. And every so often, if it needs help, it'll pop up and ask you for help. Other than that, it'll just, it'll run your affairs in the background. It'll make payments. It'll negotiate the best deals on power and utilities. It'll all happen automatically on your behalf. And I personally see that as the future of banking, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, whatever, pick a time period. And certainly for me, I would love that, right? Because I don't know how I don't want to interact with the bank, right? I've got no interest in interacting with the bank. I went to a branch. Remember those things there, those retail outlets where people go and do stuff with coins. So I went to a branch the other day, which was kind of like a museum experience. And it made me realize just how bad the overall system and experience is, and reinforced my view that, no, I don't want to interact with my bank. I've got no interest. But then my business partner, he has a different view. He loves to, but he's got a bit of an accounting background. He loves to, on a weekly or monthly basis, go and download the transactions and look through them. And I, for the life of me, can't figure out why anyone would want to do that. But he does. Right.
As a business partner, that's the best thing. If you had two of you, then you probably wouldn't look. He's probably crossing that detail, looking into it. Just for a Sunday breakfast, he's probably looking at the detail, whilst you're like being visionary. But even like if you think the superannuation industry, I find that amazingly archaic, because you have to call your broker, or the big four don't call you; they just charge you a lot of money. So if you then do self-managed super fund, you've still got to call someone to figure out what's going on. But if you have an intelligent agent going, do you know what, you could capitalize on the uplift of the American market now and shift money and press approve. The superannuation return for customers through smart robotics would be unreal. But what's your general view of trends that you think we're going to foresee from an economy perspective, and how might Verteva take advantage of that in the next 12 months?
Yeah, look, certainly we've spoken about it already, but certainly this hyper acceleration of digital adoption is going to be massive for us. So it used to be as most people probably listening to this know, we had the vanguards of change, and then you had the early adopters, and then whatever language that framework has at any one time. And then you've got the mainstream, then you've got the laggards, the late adopters. And so innovation goes through that standard kind of pattern, right? Now, we all know the first guy that had a BlackBerry, right? And back at the start of that cycle, and then everyone kind of mainstreams the product. What we're seeing now, which I think is absolutely fascinating, is this radical accelerated adoption of digital interaction, purchasing, distribution, and communication across all people's lives. There's no such thing as an early adopter anymore and a laggard, because the whole world's been put in timeout, right? From my 70-year-old parents down to the 18-year-old university student, everyone is doing the same thing. They're all sitting there and being forced to interact digitally online as their primary way of purchasing, interacting, communicating, being serviced. And I'm struggling to think of back over the course of the last 2,000 years, or maybe apart from the Black Plague and somewhere in the Dark Ages, there's been almost no time where the whole of the world has been forced to shelter in place and do the same thing at the same time. And that's what we're seeing now. So it's going to be an incredible change. And that's great for our business, right? So our business is about changing the mortgage refinancing process for the better by simplifying it, using data, and originating, distributing, fulfilling straight through. And now we're seeing, I think it will be a hyper accelerator to our business case.
Yeah, and you mentioned BlackBerry as well. I think that was the game changer in my relationship, where things really started to get challenging, because that red little bleep that used to go off, that was the first notification. That was, the first time working 24/7, because your phone kept on flashing red.
Yeah, that's right. And look, the other one for us is the change in the change in physical interactive dynamics. So people will eventually start to interact on a normal basis moving forward. Well, let's hope they do. Otherwise, it's a pretty sad world, right? But the way that people think about how they interact, who they interact with, and what the default looks like is going to change. So no one on the back of this COVID-19 situation is going to be especially excited having some stranger come and sit in their living room for 3 hours in front of them and fill out a paper-based form for a mortgage, right? And that's the majority of the industry today. So it's all paper-based. It's either through mortgage brokers, where you go to physically to the branch and sit down with a lending manager. And if you put those two together, you're talking well in excess of 80% of the way that mortgages are originated today. It's face-to-face, person-to-person, paper-based forms. I don't think that model will survive COVID-19.
Yeah, and also, don't get me started on the business banking. That's even worse. But it's the same. So a couple of quick questions then. So what's a top book recommendation? One, if you've got one or more, but what's a book recommendation you've got for people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually, I just ordered Peter Carey's short story. So Peter Carey's famous Australian author. Yeah. And I ordered his compilation of short stories. It's, 15, 20 years old. And it's just truly fantastic as a book. It's because it's an easy read, right? And there's one story in there which I just finished, which was my favourite one from university, which going back tells you how old I am, 20, 30 years ago, called The Last Day of a Famous Mime. And it's probably the darkest short story you could ever read, but actually really appropriate for these times. But he's just such a wonderful author.
Class. And then the all-time favourite rugby player?
Oh, the Australians aren't going to like this, but I have to say it's Richie McCaw.
Yeah, absolute hero. Cool. Well, I appreciate you being involved in the series. You're one of the most exciting fintechs that will be for the 2021 year. Wish you guys all the luck, and have a good rest of the day and weekend.
Thanks, Andrew. Really, really appreciate it, mate. Bye.